Good morning. Thank you for coming to our talk. My name is Ahmad Sadeghi from Technical University Darmstadt in Germany, and also Intel Collaborative Research Institute for Secure Computing. Christopher and I are going to present this talk. This is a joint work with our colleagues from UC Irvine and Immunet Incorporation. So the title suggests that this is a defensive work. It's not a work about attacks, but it is based on our experience of the several last years on runtime attacks and in general exploits specifically based on code reuse attacks. So let me just motivate. It is amazing that after so many years, we are still concerned with many problems that are actually 3 decades old. Legacy is actually our problem. There are, of course, we want more functionality. We sacrifice security for functionality. Our IT systems are getting more complex. Nearly everybody has access to smartphones and thousands and hundred thousands of applications. And the situation is not changing. So we have many developers, different developers with different intentions and different knowledge, specifically about security. And the subject that it seems to be very attractive to the research community, not only in the academia, but also in industry, industrial research, is that how can we build secure systems from insecure code? This sounds a bit odd, somehow contradictory, but it seems that this is the general understanding, at least currently, that we just need to protect our legacy code, our native code. And this is actually one of the reasons why I would like to just explain the fact that just protecting insecure systems by adding more and more new stuff is not really the ultimate solution, but it seems that we are not going to end with such a fancy solution as we wish. So if you go back to the history, I just put some of the attacks that have been published, at least those that we know about. And interestingly, many of these runtime attacks were used in hacker community, but not really by academia. It just got attractive for academia as they started to think about how they can put it together, how they can give tasks to PhD students that regard software security. So one of the papers that I'm aware of.
Due to technical difficulties, a portion of this presentation was not recorded. We are joining the program already in progress.
Instruction sequences are very short. They end with a return instruction. And when you put them together, we call them gadget because they realize they implement a certain task, certain functionality like load, store. And when we combine the gadgets, we have the attack payload. And it's a debatable, but return-oriented programming can be seen as a generalization of return to libc. Okay, how does it work? Just a simple example. If you have a program stack, and let's say these are the gadgets that sequences of instructions that the adversary wants to chain together, then each of them has kind of return. So usually assume that the adversary even wants to change the content of registers. So first, there is a vulnerability. This is the assumption. And then the attacker puts his or her stuff on the stack, and this is consisting of return addresses and also those values that the attacker wants to compute with. So this is a stack pointer. And then the first return address, when you just go to the first sequence, which is the first gadget, for example, and then the stack pointer is moved. And then you go after the return, you use the return address which is on the stack and go to the second sequence where the register values are popped and change the content of the register based on the values that the adversary has already chosen. And then it goes further again. So kind of loop that is just continuing until the attack is completed. So this is the principle of this attack. And one of the basic problems also in the industrial solution is that when you use heuristic because of efficiency aspects is how big should this gadget space be that I can still run an attack so that I can put my gadgets together. And since it is shown that ROP attacks are Turing complete, that means you can generate arbitrary behavior of the program. So you can chain together whatever you want, build together whatever malicious code you want. And from that point of view, there is actually no point to say how big my space could be. There is no answer to that because it has been shown that even with a very small space of code, or let's say code space, you can run such an attack. Okay, what is the adversary model in general that we are talking about, and also the solution that we are going to present in this adversary model where the application, you have code, you have data, and we assume that this application has also scripting capabilities because most web browsers, for example, have this capability. And we also assume that protections of modern systems like memory pages are writable or executable are already in place. So we make the work of the adversary harder. Also, we assume that there is a randomization because most of the realistic systems, real-world systems, they are using ASLR in conventional sense, so to say. But we assume about the adversary itself that it can disclose memory, so it gets side channels, side channel information. It can write to the memory, and it can also perform arbitrary computation because it has access to the scripting engine. So a scripting engine can be seen as an oracle that is working for the adversary. As I mentioned, this is a very hot topic of research currently, and security conferences are full of papers against code reuse attacks, and it's going on. So there are two main defenses that have been emerged in this area. One of them is code randomization, or in general diversity, code diversity, and the other one is control flow integrity. So in this talk, we are going to focus on code randomization, but let me just give you a flavor of what is actually in general a big picture differences between them. So, or let's say pros and cons. So randomization has low performance because you just randomize, permute something in your memory. It scales because you can use it for more complex software like a browser or operating system. However, if you have information disclosure or you have low entropy randomization, then you can break it. Control flow integrity gives you some kind of formal assurance because if you remember about the control flow graph of a code, when the code is executing, you check at every branching, the best case would be at every branching you check if the benign flow, what was intended by the developer, is followed or not. If not, you just stop the execution. So you can also do a formal analysis on that in theory. In practice, beside the fact that we can't get a complete control flow graph, a real precise one, there is also a trade-off between performance and security because when you do so many checks for all branching, it gets very inefficient, and so you need to make compromises, and this compromise will compromise the security, as it has been shown many times in the last 3-4 years. And it is very challenging to use it for a complex software, as mentioned. Okay, so let us go through the code randomization. ASLR, I think most of you know what ASLR is, and there is something which is called fine-grained ASLR. So you don't just push in a random offset your memory or your addresses in your memory. You just try to make it more complicated. What does it mean? If you have a set of instructions with returns, you can do different things. you can, at different granularities. That means you can permute functions, you can even go to the level of instructions that you randomize instruction addresses. And there have been lots of effort in this area. Unfortunately, fine-grained randomization was shown to be vulnerable to the so-called JITROP, just-in-time return-oriented programming. It was presented by us in Black Hat 2013. And it is actually relatively simple. I will come to that. So what it does, it undermines any fine-grained randomization scheme. It shows that memory disclosure, which was, I think for many people who are working in software security, it is clear that memory disclosure is a realistic assumption that you get kind of side channel from your memory, if it's a function pointer or any other address. But memory disclosure was considered to be something which is there, but it is not so crucial. But we see that it's very crucial, given the attacks of the last years. And it has been also shown that you can do that with the real-world exploits. So how does it work? I just explained to you very shortly how does JITROP work. So we we assume that we have a single address that leads to the leakage of a whole memory page. So you have an address, like a function pointer, and you have a memory page, and these memory pages, let's say, are 4 kilobyte aligned memory. So we know the address. We can simply compute the starting and the ending point. And then we know that this page, this function A, we know the address. So if we disassemble this page, then we get maybe a call to another function, function B. And from that, we have another pointer to another page, and we disassemble that page as well, and that goes on at runtime through the scripting engine of the, remember the adversary model, we assume that we have access to a scripting engine. Okay, so in that sense, you generate enough gadgets that you can put them together and put the payload at the end by chaining these gadgets together to achieve your goal. And these are just examples for interrupt, for loading, for storing, for moving. And then you can also automatize that by just using a high level language, so that you just chain all these things together don't have to do everything manually. This has been shown that it's very crucial attack. So all the randomization techniques need to add other defenses to be to defend against JITROP. So now this slide should show you all the effort, actually, to summarize all the effort of the past years on how to, let's say, mitigate randomization attacks like JITROP in the adversary that I was talking about. So we start again, we summarize. A single pointer disclosure can simply bypass ASLR, conventional ASLR, where you just have a random offset. Then we have fine-grained randomization. That one was bypassed by JITROP. Then we have direct code disclosure, which is actually what JITROP is exploiting. We call it direct code disclosure because if you have a pointer, you have a direct access to the whole code page. So for that, how can we prevent the adversary of doing that? We just make the code page execute only. So you cannot read it. You have the pointer, but you cannot read it. However, it has been shown that this is a problem itself because there is something that we define it as indirect code disclosure. You get a pointer to the code, but not the code itself, but that is enough information to put to just chain again our gadgets. So what we do, and this is why this talk is all about, where to go, it is code pointer hiding, and Christopher is going to explain that. And what does it mean? It means that if the adversary doesn't know where the code pointers, like virtual function tables, or return addresses are, that is done by giving the adversary only one address. And this is the address by using the good old idea of trampoline. And this is a kind of list of jumps. The adversary knows this address, but from that address, the adversary doesn't know where are actually the address of the codes. Okay. Now, the problem is if we have trampolines, then the adversary may have some idea what is behind those addresses which is in the list of trampoline. So for that, we need to kind of obfuscate his view, and this is done by randomization of the registers. In that case, we want to break the gadget chain. This raises the bar, but it doesn't mean that it is the perfect solution because you have a limited number of registers. And there are maybe ways to also bypass that. We just think that it could be, and for that, there is also a solution. So this was kind of effort of the community, the academic community, but also the industrial research community to improve the randomization by adding code pointer hiding, and they raised the bar heavily. So this is a very good news. And now the system that we are going to explain to you in this talk is called Redactor, and it's a defensive system, as I mentioned, and how to resist memory disclosure with more detail. And this is what Christopher is going to explain.
Thanks. Yeah. So, sound?
No?
No? Yes. Yes. No. Very good. Yeah, I'm going to explain how Redactor works, what we implemented, and what we have to consider during the implementation. But let me first give you a quick overview of our goals. So our system should be secure, of course. We want to prevent the code reuse attacks Ahmad just mentioned. And we do randomization. So, and as Ahmad mentioned, memory disclosure is one of the biggest threats to randomization, because if the attacker can read or disclose the randomization secret, he can basically undo it. We want to be comprehensive. That means we don't only want to protect ahead of time compiled code, but also JIT code. And of course, it should be practical. That is, we don't want to protect Hello World applications or the Windows calculator. We want to protect real browsers, complex software, so our solutions must scale to really big and complex programs. And of course, we want to be fast, because nobody is going to use our solution, even if it provides perfect security, if there's an overhead of 100 or 120%. So let me first say how we prevent direct memory disclosure. So in theory, this is fairly simple. We just have to ensure that the adversary cannot read code pages. However, in practice, there are some challenges. Mainly, so there was some previous effort on implementing execute-only memory, but these were software-emulated solutions, which are basically not secure. So if there's a page executed, it automatically also becomes readable, and an adversary can exploit this. What we want to have is execute-only memory enforced by the hardware, and of course it should run on current hardware. So we don't want to depend on any legacy features or anything else. And the way we do this is we use memory virtualization. So, but let me first give you a quick recap on how memory protection in general works on x86. So we have virtual addresses, which gets translated using a so-called page table to physical addresses. Physical addresses is the real address in your memory. And during the translation, the memory management unit can enforce some permissions. However, the disadvantage of x86 page tables is that as soon as your code page is executable, it is also readable. So there's no extra flag where you can say, okay, I only want to have this page executable but not readable. Same goes for having a page writable. So when a page is writable, it's also readable, and in theory also executable. The way the vendors solved this issue, they introduced another bit to the page table, which basically says, okay, this page should not be executable. But as I said, we don't get execute only. However, if we enable memory virtualization, we actually add another layer of translation. So our virtual addresses get first translated to guest physical addresses, which then again get translated using the extended page tables to host physical addresses, which are then the real physical addresses. And the extended page tables allow us to set the permission bits individually. That is, we can actually say, okay, a page should only be executable. And the effective permission for a page is then determined by the intersection of the permission of the page table and the extended page table. So we can actually mark cold pages as execute only. As you can see, for all other pages, we basically set the permission in the extended page table to read, write, execute, so that the effective permission of the page is determined by the permission set in the page table, because again, it's the intersection of both. So this is how we can prevent direct memory disclosure. But as mentioned before, there's still this thing called indirect memory disclosure. And I can give you a quick example on how this actually works. So consider an application where we have execute only memory enabled, and we have two functions. So we apply some fine-grained randomization and permutate the function order. So the attacker can no longer know where these functions are located. However, the attacker does know that we only permutate functions and that the content of the function is still the same. So all the instructions remain the same. And what the attacker can do, he can leak pointers to these functions. It actually doesn't matter whether the function pointer points to the beginning of the function or into the middle of the function. Once he has a pointer to somewhere in the function, he can infer the instructions within the function and then gather his gadgets. So what we are going to do about that? We do code pointer hiding. I don't know if you're familiar with we have a famous computer scientist called David Wheeler. He once said, all problems in computer science can be solved by another level of indirection. And yeah, this is basically what we did. We added another layer of indirection in form of so-called trampolines. These are basically just direct jump instructions. However, since they reside in execute-only memory, the attacker cannot disclose the destination of these jumps. So while the attacker do know the address of a trampoline, he does not know where the trampoline is going to. And an application obviously knows which trampoline to use and can just use a trampoline and then go into the function. Note, we also permutate the order of the trampolines itself, so an attacker cannot just disclose one trampoline address and then also infer all the others. So here's our, coming to the implementation, here's our design of Redactor. So what we did, we modified a compiler. In particular, we modified LLVM. So one of the most crucial things is that LLVM or the compiler does not put data into the code section, because our code section will be marked as execute only, and when there's data in there which the program wants to use, it will just crash. Next, we applied some fine-grained code randomization in form of function permutation, since this is a very cheap way of, in sense of performance, to apply randomization. And we also do register randomization, which I will come to later again. And of course, we for every code pointer which is used within the application, we create some trampolines so we can do code pointer hiding. So at runtime, it basically looks like this. we implement a very thin hypervisor. This is really just to enable memory virtualization and can be done in, we have like under 500 lines of C code. It really only enables memory virtualization and sets up the extended page table to have execute-only memory, but the rest of the operating system will execute on the bare metal system, so there's no interaction required anymore. And we also did some modification to the operating system because currently there's no support for execute-only memory natively by the x86 hardware page tables. So we also had to change the operating system a bit to make use of the feature that we are providing through the thin hypervisor. From there on, we can run both applications, like a redacted application, so which is protected by our scheme, which will just notify the operating system that every code page of the application should be marked as execute only, as well as legacy application, where the application will just say, okay, I want to have my code pages as readable and executable, so we don't break anything. We can have protected and unprotected applications on the same system. It might look not so good to have a hypervisor in there, and actually it's also not really needed anymore. After we finished our work, Intel announced their protection keys, which are meant to be to protect keys in memory. However, we can also exploit this feature to have execute-only memory. So we actually don't depend on the hypervisor anymore. So now we can protect ahead of time compiled code. But as we said, like, sophisticated attacks are normally not launched against the Windows calculator. The calculator is more in aftermatch. No, but we want to protect applications which are target of sophisticated attacks, which are normally launched through scripting engines. So we want to protect browsers or document viewers, and they have JIT code. JIT code is a little bit hard to protect, or a little bit we must handle it differently, because it frequently changes or modifies the code. So it is the code is actually treated as code and data. The way we solve this problem is that we separate cleanly separate the phases where the JIT compiler needs to treat the code as data and where it can be treated as normal code. So during the phases where some compilation optimization is applied, we map the code as read and writable, and for the rest of the time we map it as executable. So this is basically our solution, and we also modified the JIT compiler, which I will talk about in the evaluation. For the evaluation, we want to see, okay, can we really apply our solution to the real world? And we did this during different things. So for performance, we took the spec benchmarking tools. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically it's a collection of programs which get some input, and then based on that you can apply your modification, let it be compiler modification or some runtime modifications, and it measures the CPU overhead. And we use that to be comparable to other solutions because everybody is apparently using it. But we also use the Chromium benchmarks to get a feel for how it would affect real-world software. And as mentioned before, we also evaluate the practicability by protecting the Chromium browser, which is, in our point of view, a fairly complex piece of software. And we also modified the JavaScript engine of Chromium V8 to test if everything's okay. So here are the performance numbers. As you can see, for most of them, they're fairly low. We have some spikes. But let's focus on the geometric mean, the average overhead of our solution. And here you can see that the full redactor, so having every protection enabled, we get roughly 6.4% overhead. But notice that by only enabling the hypervisor and execute-only memory, we already, this introduces 2% overhead. So actually, by using the different way to have execute-only memory, being, let it be the Intel protection keys, or maybe Intel or AMD wants to add in the future to the actual page table some execute-only bit, then we could cut the performance by another 2%, which will leave us at roughly 4% overhead, which is very practical. We also did evaluation for the V8 engine, and there we get similar numbers, so between 6.2 and 7.8% overhead. And actually for the Chromium browser, for its benchmarks, we only get, so which test mainly the smoothness and responsiveness of the web pages and of the browser, we only get 4% overhead. So it's, if you use the Chromium browser with our protection applied, you don't actually feel the difference. But is our solution secure? Yes. We build up resilience against direct and indirect memory disclosure, which leaves the attacker basically to guessing where the gadgets are, because we really ensure that every executable code resides in non-readable memory. However, what we cannot prevent is that an attacker discloses trampoline addresses. And in our adversary model, although we do some randomization also there, but in the adversary model, we have to assume that sooner or later the attacker will get access to every trampoline address. And there are actually two types of trampoline address. So we have trampolines which jump into the code and at function beginnings. And for classical ROP, you usually want to aim for trampolines which jump into the code. One thing return to the program heavily depends on is the data flow between individual registers. So for example, if an attacker wants to do return to programming to execute a specific system call, he wants to make sure that he uses one gadget which loads a specific value into a specific register. And by applying register randomization, we can ensure that the first gadget which you use, for example, to load a value in register A, will no longer use register A, but maybe B, C, or D. So, and this will break the attack sooner or later. But there's this other kind of trampolines which point at the function beginning. And actually, this doesn't make a difference for the attacker, like if he has the direct address of the function or a trampoline which jumps to the function. In either case, he can execute the whole function. And actually, we have shown that we can also launch Turing-complete attacks, so the same thing as ROP, basically, using virtual functions. And here's how we protect these functions. This is now for vtables, but it basically applies to every table of functions. We split the function table into two parts. One part resides in the readable memory and only contains a pointer to the part which resides in execute-only memory. And here we have, again, trampolines. However, we don't only have trampolines. We introduce some fake entries we call booby traps, which, when executed, just terminate the program. And we do this because, let's consider we have a function table which has only 2 entries. So it would be fairly easy for an attacker to get, just by using brute force attack, which function resides at which location. But by adding booby trap addresses, we first increase the entropy and also build up resilience against brute force attacks, because when an attacker executes a booby trap, we automatically shut down the program and possibly also maybe notify an intrusion detection system that we don't want to, that we make sure that the specific web page or specific document cannot be opened by the user anymore. So this limits the ability of the attacker to brute force everything. And again, it's an execute-only memory, so the attacker can never know where the booby trap is and where the real entry is. But the application which was compiled using, which is aware of these booby traps and the randomization, obviously can use it without breaking the program. So to conclude our defense technique, code reuse attacks are a severe threat. This is acknowledged by the industry. We have seen that Microsoft and Google, they build up defenses against these attacks. However, they have to make it performant and legacy compliant. So there's always some way around it. With Redactor, we built the first hardware-enforced execute-only fine-grained memory runitization scheme for current x86 hardware. We are resilient against both direct and indirect code disclosure, and we can protect complex and real-world things like JIT code or the Chromium browser. And with that,
Okay, so you want me to say something about?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Just
Okay, it's the coming soon. Actually, I don't know why I should say it. So we talked about Redactor as a software or hardware-assisted solution. Also, something that we call Redactor++, which is, as Christopher was mentioning, how you can protect against whole function reuse. These are some new class of attacks that are actually, simply said, are similar to return to libc attacks, something that is known for many, many years, but still very challenging to stop it. Other things that we are doing currently is, also together with industrial partners, is how to use these techniques, randomizations, for example, techniques with added mitigation mechanisms for mobile platforms. And because there we have another world, maybe there we don't have hardware support for execute only, not in all platforms. And I don't know if you are familiar with embedded systems. So in the embedded system world, security is a mess. And embedded systems are used in many, let's say, even safety critical applications, from automotive to critical infrastructures. And these attacks, I mean, return-oriented programming attacks for embedded systems, maybe it is too advanced, but there are return-oriented programming attacks on embedded systems. And since this area is not explored as PC and server area, I'm sure that in future we have very advanced attacks on those systems as well. And the buzzword is here IoT, so Internet of Things. For me, they're all embedded systems that are connected to each other, and that will have another dimension, because once you attack one of them, maybe you can have a crossover, let's say, infection to other devices. This is why I personally think, beside the aspect of software and randomization, because it is very efficient, also for embedded systems, one thing that we are also considering is other approaches, as I mentioned at the beginning, like control flow integrity. And in that sense, we have collaboration with Intel, where hardware-based control flow integrity are considered as a good option. This is another approach than randomization. It guarantees the control flow of your program. At least it gives you, in practice, it gives you some guarantees. And that means extending the CPU instructions with specific instructions that are used for control flow integrity. With that, I come to the end of the talk, and thank you very much for your attention.